Yeah.
Should we stand there?
Yours fine. Yours is pretty more big. Your time begins on your first one.
Your honorable chairs and distinguished delegates, the sponsors of this resolution submit this draft with one central belief, that the continued escalation of violence in the Middle East is no longer sustainable for civilians, for regional stability, or for international peace. Distinguished delegates, this draft prioritizes the two-state solution over political gain, having the solutions for both peace and safety. It establishes a permanent ceasefire, a pact between Israel and Palestine, and sanctions for any terrorists or countries that violate this peace, including the suspension of humanitarian assistance for treaty breakers. This time, the delegation of Egypt would like to view the broader view of our draft. Recognizing that instability thrives where institutions are weak, this resolution introduces a temporarily UN-led platform to assist Palestine in building transparent legislative systems. Furthermore, humanitarian aid is placed under strict UN coordination. This prevents diversion of aid, ensuring that assistance reaches civilians without any possible interference, such as terrorism. Finally, this resolution acknowledges that peace cannot exist inside its isolation. It calls upon regional actors to commit to temporary non-interference, supported by economic and security guarantees, preventing regional spillovers with the termination of the extremist group and terrorist groups. At the same time, cooperation is mentioned in the peace contract of Israel and Egypt. Honorable delegates, this resolution is firm where it must be, humanitarian where it should be, and realistic in its informant mechanisms. It does not promise instant peace, but absolute and guaranteed peace. Our bloc urges the committee to support this resolution and take a decisive step toward our lasting stability and peace in the Middle East. Thank you. I yield my time to Delegate of Israel.
In order to recall the founding mission of the United States, it is important and absolutely necessary to protect citizens and uphold international peace and security. The ongoing violence between Gaza and southern Israel has displaced thousands and destroyed vital infrastructure. To solve this problem, now the first resolution that we came up with starts with the establishment of both the State of Palestine and the State of Israel along the pre-1967 borders. And second, Jerusalem will serve as the shared capital, which is going to be divided into East and West under UNSC oversight. A 6-month military cultivation program will train Palestinian forces to defend against terrorism, ensuring neutrality, and preventing escalation. Also, the UNSC's role will be only limited to safeguarding against external terrorist threats without interfering in foreign affairs or borders. In the case that this is kept, this resolution will formally acknowledge the State of Palestine as a legitimate nation. Delegates, peace cannot be achieved without addressing the humanitarian crisis. This resolution establishes a UNSC-led humanitarian coordination platform in cooperation with all the countries in the world, including Egypt, to ensure aid reaches those most in need. Key provisions include 1. UNSC peacekeepers being the sole authorized distributors of aid to both Israel and Palestine, which creates a check and balance if one of those countries do not keep the treaty. Number 2, borders will open exclusively for humanitarian purposes, with military personnel barred from aid zones during the process of rehabilitation and humanitarian aid reaching Gaza. Third, a UNSC-managed humanitarian aid fund will be created, ensuring an equal influence among contributing nations, regardless of their size of their donations. And fourth, any changes in aid distribution will require unanimous agreement from all contributing nations, as well as the Palestinian Authority and Israel. I now yield my time to the State of Palestine.
Honorable Chair and esteemed delegations, this committee must move beyond short-term resolutions to long-term stability approaches in the Middle East. Delegates, failure from past resolutions is not just accidental, it is deeply structural. A stable political future requires institutions that govern through law, not forces such as Hamas. Independent judicial, executive, and legislative bodies can only function when governance is clearly separated from armed authority. If this council is truly for the complete autonomy of both Israel and Palestine, we must call for a structural reform. This committee must start with accountability. Acts of terrorism and justice must be a priority because they directly undermine governance themselves. Individuals responsible must be held accountable to the international legal mechanisms, including the ICC, because justice is not optional, it is an obligation even during times of conflict. In the Middle East, land, history, and culture shape the community's perception, and that perception will determine how communities will respond to our international action. And when external frameworks ignore this, they may interrupt violence temporarily, but they will fail to change behavior and build trust in the long term. This will explain why similar interventions will succeed in certain conflicts, but will collapse in others. Delegates, urgent action is necessary, but when short-term frameworks never address why instability returns, the short term will become permanent. This resolution will not promise immediate peace. However, it will establish the conditions under which peace can last. This bloc would like to urge every delegate present here today support a framework that moves beyond managing crises to preventing their reoccurrence. With that, I yield my time to the delegation of Russia.
Dear delegates, the cycle of temporary ceasefire and war must be cut off. Therefore, the bloc proposes the establishment of a permanent ceasefire in the Middle East. In order to secure peace with certainty, the bloc proposes the establishment of a temporary ceasefire in the entire region around the Israel-Palestine conflict, and enforcing sanctions from the UNSC to cut all funding to a country that breaks this treaty. The UN will provide economical and infrastructural support to the neighboring nations of the conflict. However, only keeping peace at a national level will not completely eradicate the conflicts in the region. Therefore, the bloc proposes the termination of all non-governmental organizations in Palestine that are considered a terrorist organization by the UNSC. This military action will only take place in the UN, and national armies will be prohibited from using military force in the zone of conflict. We will make sure no chaos or misunderstanding occurs because of this by notifying all regional powers that this act is done exclusively as a defensive response to the terrorism in the Middle East. In providing aid during the temporary peace in the Middle East, the UN will make sure all support of aid is given through the UN and no individual nation will have involvement. To conclude the resolution of our bloc, we advocate for the establishment of the two-state solution, providing humanitarian aid, helping developing countries, and establishing a permanent ceasefire in the region. Thus, the delegates of Bloc 1 would like to encourage all delegates to agree with the resolution statement and to advocate for peace through true mediation and diplomacy. Thank you. Now I yield my time to all POIs.
The delegates have yielded themselves POIs. Are there any going once? Twice? No POIs? The chair is Mordecai not any POIs.
Thank you for your speech, delegates. This delegate has a question based on what the delegates have mentioned about long-term and short-term goals on peace. However, could the delegate elaborate more on sorry, this delegate's not scripted. Could the delegates explain more on how this would also help and affect the other countries that in the Middle East that are also in war, not only with the Israeli and Palestine?
So by stopping the war between Israel and Palestine, the money wasted and the infrastructure being destroyed in between other countries that tries to intervene in this war will be stopped as well, since other countries do not need to waste their weapons and bombs and other cost and really expensive resources on just defending the country due to religious reasons, and keeping peace is the most important thing above all religion. So I believe that this is going to be the case.
Furthermore, using the humanitarian aid fund that's established by the United Nations Security Council, this will prevent any or all proxy wars that will happen by militarizing humanitarian aid.
Also, if this Israel and Palestine conflict ends by happening, regional actors acting with each other and cooperating fully, they can understand how they can help each other even in situations such as we explained that we can expand the Rafah crossing so that Egypt and Gaza can cooperate to secure the borders and secure this two-state solution. As this example leads, we can show every country in the Middle East that regional actors in the Middle East can cooperate to help each other.
Follow-up? No follow-ups. And with that, their time has elapsed, and therefore, the chairs thank the delegates, and may they return to their seats. Yes? I don't think so for this one. delegate meeting period is for delegates to propose any and all